Oops, sorry, I just hit the wrong button. All right, well, welcome everybody to our culture chat today on May 17th. This topic that we're talking about today is experiencing cultural adjustments with intra-country or regional moves. I think this is such a great topic. It's something in my own practice that I come across quite a bit, and I know many of you think about this a lot, that sometimes we're talking about cultural values of a country, and then we need to get more specific about a regional area and how things can be different in that region. And I think it becomes very important if we're talking about values from one region and it doesn't really align with where our participants of our programs or the people that we're supporting are going to. So great topic, and we will have Eric Davis leading us on this topic. Before we get started, I just wanted to mention some upcoming events for the Interchange Institute. We do have some 2023 dates for our Crossing Cultures with Competence Level 1. As you can see, there's some online, and we will be having some live in-person dates. So take a look at that. If it's something that you think any of these months for travel will be good for you, then please, get with Tasha or I, and we'll work around that and tell you the dates. Vanessa Paisley is going to be leading us in her webinar. It's not what you say, it's how you say it. And those will be coming up in October and December. Our culture chat schedule for our future few next dates will be right here. So remember, they're every other week. Mark your calendar. Culture chat topics, share your expertise. We are thrilled Eric came to us with this idea for a topic. We don't have all the ideas in our heads. You guys are out there and you know what's going on and you can think of creative things. Tasha and I just had an email the other day from someone who came up with the topic, and her name's Tamara McConey. She's going to be leading us again. So please, if you have ideas or something comes to mind that's interesting to you in our field, come to us. We'd love to have you lead with us. The intercultural training expertise certification submissions are now for August 1st for this next quarter. So if you are working on that or getting close, let us know. August 1st will be the deadline for that. And then lastly, just another little push for the Intercultural Circle. Please join that if you're able. We'd love to have you. This is a benefit for you to be part of our community, but it's also like a little level up, and it helps us a lot to maintain these culture chats and keep them going. And so it's a very small fee, but you do get the recordings, and all the PowerPoints from these culture chats will be available. So please consider that if you have not already joined our circle. Okay, let's get on to our chat today. It's my pleasure to introduce Eric Davis. Eric joined the CERVA Intercultural team in October of 2014. He came on board from a decade-long tenure with the domestic and international supply chain logistics industry. He has experience in international trade regulation and holds an understanding of topics relating to the Bureau of Industry and Security. Eric has a Bachelor's of Science degree in business management, and he has a certification in supply chain management. Using this knowledge and experience, he works in supporting CERVA's global network of intercultural trainers through onboarding, platform, and additional trainer resource support. Eric is married with 2 children. He has a son and a daughter. We were just talking about them. They're 8 and 9. In his free time, Eric enjoys reading, hiking, camping, playing strategy games. He is also a lifelong fan of the Dallas Cowboys NFL football team. Eric hopes to one day take an extended tour of Europe. He's aspiring to become fluent right now in Hebrew, Spanish, and Scottish Gaelic. This year, Eric became an alumnus of the Crossing Cultures with Competence workshop. I personally worked with Eric over the years, and I am thrilled that he'll be facilitating this chat for us today. Eric, I'm going to turn it over to you.
All right, thank you. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen here.
Yeah.
All right. Well, I just want to take the opportunity to thank Tasha and Terry for giving me this time, and for everyone here to, giving me this time and this platform to bring this topic. So I wanted to start and ask the question, what brings us into this field of global mobility, intercultural services, and even general humanitarian efforts? We recognize that there are several aspects that present a need in our global community. We understand that people are different. We understand that differences taken out of context can and do lead to conflict. This requires forward-thinking people who are willing to step in and help when help is needed. So when we're answering this, now what keeps us in this field? What keeps us in this field and cultivating this intercultural and international community? Well, we don't see clients and companies as opportunities to build wealth, even though we do, but that's not why we're here. That's not what keeps us here. We're here because we see people who can at times need a fresh perspective on what it means to truly build relationships, even in a transactional setting. So my particular tasks daily are and can be transactional, but I've come to realize that having a very brief, even in the shortest conversation, having a conversation with somebody, I have this opportunity to plant a seed and build a relationship. This is why we work in this field. We don't like to see failed assignments because it affects people. We're in the business of teaching others how to course correct. And these course corrections affect how we perceive differences between people. One such correction that I want to bring up today is how we perceive differences in people and cultures with regard to intra-country and regional moves. So we recognize that there's many differences between countries. We're all well versed to give teaching and instruction on how to prepare someone who is going to experience this. But why is there almost an exclusive focus on the person who is going to another country? Is it possible to apply this to an intra-country regional move? So let's take, for example, Brazil. If you go from Sao Paulo all the way to the Amazon, there are big differences in the dialects that they speak. And these dialects are a direct reflection of the difference in culture from the starting point to the ending point. Let's also take into consideration the sense of time orientation in the more carefree life of the West Coast in the US to the faster paced, busier hustle and bustle life in the Northeast US. These concepts are at the root of what causes culture shock. We're all aware of the concept of culture shock, but this is not a phenomenon that's really exclusive to two different countries. In fact, Merriam-Webster's dictionary describes it and defines it as a sense of confusion and uncertainty, sometimes with feelings of anxiety that affect people exposed to an alien culture or environment without adequate preparation. So nowhere in this definition does it explain that there's different countries involved. But in the intercultural field, we can sometimes make or mistakenly make this inference. We commonly view the international community as a group of colors ranging across the entire color spectrum. But then in that same thought can make the assumption that most people within a single country or region are mostly the same, but with ranging shades of the same set of colors. So this seems to place an emphasis on the possibility of greater culture shock being squarely on the international realm. Granted, there is a possibility that in some nations, they may be less diversified in thought, belief, and general culture. But history can even support this diversification the further back we look, or the lack of diversification. However, in the shifting focus on global mobility and talent development, I find it very difficult to imagine that this is the general rule in today's world. So from here on, I'm going to use some images that I've personally collected from two different states in the US just to show these differences in a different way. So let's take, for example, the geographical, climate, and visual difference of these two places. You'll see on the left-hand side, the hot, rigid, defined skyline of the Superstition mountain range, which is in Arizona, And that's quite a bit different from the cooler, gentle rolling hills of the Blue Ridge Mountains in South Carolina. So in that regard, why don't we consider the cultural differences even when this geography and climate are almost nothing alike? Let's take a quick pause, and this is a bit of a group participation activity. Let's take a quick trip around the world and make a few stops, and let's try to answer some of these questions as a group. And so y'all can have a little input here. So I'm gonna just pose this question. Does anybody know how many official languages are in Switzerland? Anybody want to take a guess?
Oh. Eric, you look at the chat box. Let me see. We've got people putting in some 4. Someone said 3. I think someone said 8.
Well, whoever said 4 is correct.
Okay.
So you have German, French, Italian, and Romanian as the official languages.
Oh, wow.
So let's go to Egypt now. In Egypt, there's 4 geographic regions, but how many cultural regions exist within Egypt with their own prominent dance? They have their own independent dance styles within these regions.
Someone said 8, 62, 5, 33, 10.
Some good guesses, yeah. There's 9. Yeah, so there's 9 different cultural regions that exist within Egypt that have their own prominent dance culture. Now let's go ahead and move on to Australia. How many languages are in Australia that are official languages?
Two, 1, 3, 2, 1.
The correct answer is none.
You know what? Pamela
There's
Strage, she got it.
Yep, there's no official language in Australia. However, English being the de facto language, up behind English though, in order, the next most common languages are Mandarin, Arabic, Vietnamese, and Cantonese. So we can clearly see just with these language differences, immediately there are some huge differences showing up. Let's go ahead and go to Ecuador. Relatively smaller country in South America, but how many indigenous cultures are in Ecuador alone?
We have guesses of 7, 8, 14, 7, 10, 46.
46 is actually a closer number than the rest.
Wow.
Ecuador has 32 indigenous cultures that each preserve their own language, their own customs, and their own traditions.
Wow.
So clearly we can see that the geographic size of a country doesn't necessarily have a heavy impact on the diversity of the people living there. So now the question is, why isn't intra-country or regional training more of a topic of focus? Well, there's several reasons. The first and most obvious reason that is regarding uniformity of national laws. These laws are in place so that they can allow a person going from one point within the borders to another point and still enjoy the same liberties. Now, from point A to point B, they may not be exactly the same laws, but there's still a uniformity undercurrent between each place. Another reason is that the client or the company may assume that the transferees will just need to figure it out. They assume that because we all have the same access to the same pop culture, media outlets, and history books, because of this, they don't include annual budgets. They won't include these services into their annual budgets. Another factor is that it's more difficult to qualify or even quantify a success at an assignment domestically versus internationally. So in this case, the risk versus reward may not be as apparent. Finally, the cultural differences between some nations are so vast that companies feel the need to allocate significantly more resources, ensuring that those assignments succeed in order to add value to their international presence. So now let's go ahead and move to work style and lifestyle. Across a single nation, these can and do absolutely look differently. In some areas, the lifestyle of one region may lean heavily into a particular focus on faith, while their neighboring state or region, or even town sometimes, may not necessarily hold these same values in high regard. So one region may view working habits as paramount to surviving in a changing world, while another may place emphasis on improving one's life elements to bring about a more well-rounded life, a more well-rounded existence. And Sean Dubert, principal and VP of learning at RW3 Culture Wizard, said, in a country like the US, regional work style differences that might appear surmountable can present true challenges. For example, the brusque task-focused approach of typical of New Yorkers would be very frustrating for a person from a place with a more laissez-faire style like Southern California. So let's now go ahead and move and look at a simple case study that we can observe just in nature. So we have two people. Let's imagine you and one of your friends sit down on a park bench and observe a colony of bees working in the tree nearby. And interestingly enough, it is very possible that the two of you will pull a completely opposite lessons from watching these bees. So let's imagine that you watch this colony, and what your takeaway from is that you watch it in amazement at how beautifully ordered and structured everything is, and wish to exemplify this order and this structure in life. However, your friend, you look over and you imagine like they look just horrified by the absolute suffocating drab existence that the bees have, because it's just all they do is just this one thing through their entire life. It's not uncommon to see this extreme shift in thought between two people who live in the same city or even in the same neighborhood, let alone two different regions within that same country. So now we're going to go ahead and look back at this list of differences that I had previously mentioned. And now let's consider these differences between states and regions within the same country. So having been born and raised in Arizona and later moved to South Carolina, two cities that are virtually on opposite ends of the United States, I did experience culture shock. Even though I had mentally prepared for it, I was prepared for these changes, I'd braced for these differences. And after the initial experience of settling in and going through the excitement of being in a new place, I very quickly discovered that even after that settled down, there were still things that I needed to come to grips with, or that I needed to come to accept. Some of the things was that the dialects that I had anticipated originally were not accurate to what my initial assumptions were. Driving habits are still not great. There's a cemetery next to just about every church, every other block, which is a subtle reminder of my own mortality. And that's something you don't see in Arizona as often. I still can't find good hot Mexican food. And despite my best efforts, I still can't find a slice of pizza that I truly enjoy. However, I did find that the pace of life here was something that I was looking more for. And that was something that brought a lot of fulfillment. Another thing was the change in setting, the change in the natural setting. Arizona, you can see for miles and miles and miles without any obstructions. Whereas here, it's just forest everywhere. So it's beautiful, but it's just a different way of seeing nature. The last one that I wanted to mention was the walkability. I live in a little bit of a smaller town now, and so there's not sidewalks. As soon as you get out of the town, of the proper town. There's no sidewalks anywhere, so walking somewhere is really kind of out of the question unless you're walking on the side of the road. But as we look at the list here at these differences, they're not simply notable between nations. They permeate between regions, between states, or even cities within a single nation. In light of all the information presented here, there is yet another layer of difficulty that we face as interculturalists. And this is in regard to addressing sourcing resource consultants or subject matter experts for when we have training programs. The challenge and ever-present concern in my estimation is, how do we, as the interculturalists, ensure that the resource that we've agreed to work with has the right experience or the right knowledge that is needed to accomplish the training program? This is where highlighting cultural changes within the same country or region are absolutely crucial. So with this in mind, we should rather learn that within each community, within each region, within each state, there are differences that can be very poignant, while others are much more subtle. Those differences seen through the lens of understanding allow us to be more readily able to learn that even when we believe or have an assumption of what a culture might be like, that we know that this place or the person that's sitting next to us might know something that we didn't consider. And without a focus on intra-country and regional differences, there is challenges that are presented for the native of a country going from their hometown to another town, but not realizing how different these two towns are. Or even in a different light, let's take an expatriate who goes to another country to work, and they might have had assumptions about a particular area that they're going to be working in, but then realize that all the information that they had obtained was for a totally different place within that country. This is going to help us to realize that there are still opportunities to change how we perceive intra-country and regional relocations. And so now we're going to go ahead and move into our breakout rooms. And we've got, I'm kind of hoping that we can go to 3 or 4 people per room. And so there's the 2 questions here that I've posed are, have you experienced a huge culture shift when you've gone to a regional move or visited a different region or state or city? And how did you or your family adjust to this shift? The second question that I wanted to pose is that as a trainer and interculturalist, have you ever experienced difficulty in finding additional program consultants because of the location or because the experience that you need, it's difficult finding someone with that particular set of experience?
Yeah. Eric, just and everyone, for your convenience, I have placed these prompts in the chat box if you want to copy them, so you have them as you go into the chat box. And just a reminder that with the 4 of you, please make sure everyone gets a chance to share. Maybe you could agree on one person to be the sort of leader, in a sense, to keep the conversation going, but also when we come back, someone who would be willing to share with the larger group. Just want to say that before we break off.
Okay.
Right. Eric, I think you can stop sharing.
Okay, so
I'm sharing right now.
So I'll open the breakout rooms and we'll give you a warning. We're going to go till 15 minutes before the hour. So that's about 17 minutes, and we'll see you then.
All right. Well, welcome back, everyone. Yeah, so let's go ahead and take some time and just discuss what we all found.
And just one tip, if we're going to watch the screen, because it's important, we want to make sure everyone gets a chance to talk who has something to share. If you use your reactions, which are down on your bottom bar, and put your hand up, we'll all be monitoring that and make sure we give people a chance to talk. So,
Eric, maybe if it would be good not to share this and we could see more, it's easier to see the whole group.
Sure. Yeah, let me go ahead and stop sharing then.
I see Emily from room 7 wants to share,
perfect.
room 4, and a few others had said.
Okay.
Emily, you want to go first? And
Sure, why not? Hello from Michigan.
hello, how are you, Emily?
Sunny Michigan. So I right away would start with question number 2, because none of us ever experienced it hard finding an RC. So we have a well-established network, and so far this did not happen. When it comes to the regional moves, so all of us pretty much moved around out of our home country to other countries and moved then within the regions. And one share was the move between coming from Scotland to the US to Louisiana. Mm-hmm. And then the move within the US from Louisiana to California. And experiencing that all of a sudden, I don't name the person unless he wants to, being able to breathe again, right? To have this, all of a sudden, this openness, this, I will put it in that sense, more liberal mindset, and having this feeling, noticing moving from one region to the other, all of a sudden, how hard it actually was to live in the first region. For me, it was within Austria, moving from Salzburg to Vienna, basically moving from this closed mountainous mindset, but very friendly, to the Vienna grumpy area, where they cultivate the grumpiness. They want to have it protected by the UNESCO even. So this was kind of a harsh thing. Then the other thing was moving, coming from, or I think this is the most interesting, Michael, if I might name it, moving from the north of England to the south, actually for university, and then finding how much stereotyping and even prejudice there was against more industrial northerners, right? I mean, manual laborers, and then coming into the academia, and how much snobbiness there was actually connected with that. And the other thing was growing up in rural Ohio and moving within rural Ohio to another city in rural Ohio, and finding out that even being 10 miles, it was a big difference culturally, how to establish oneself in the new society, and even within such a close frame that it can be so difficult. So this was basically our finding, put short and simple.
Great. Thank you for sharing.
Awesome. Tasha, who else had their hand up? You had a.
I think Kelly Hinkhouse was going to share for her group, I believe.
Perfect. Thank you.
Oops. Okay. Hi, everyone. So my group actually had some interesting moves happening. One from China to the UK, and even noticing different parts of the UK, north and south, the changes there. Another person in our group has the expat life, right? So has moved all over. Every 1 to 2 years, and she plans to go to Portugal over the summer. And then we talked about just differences between the states. And so coming from maybe Arizona to Florida. And we discussed just we kind of took a turn towards sunlight. That became a little mini conversation in our discussion. And so just the differences in places and sunlight and how that can affect kind of our mood, right? And so people going out of their way to plan vacations to just bring that overall well-being, like they're seeking sunlight, seeking a change, you know, in their overall, you know, gain your vitamin D, right? And so we also discussed, gosh, it was such a rich discussion. And so 3 women coming together and talking about traveling as women, and just some of the interesting concepts with that too. And just if you're used to being an expat, then it just, you know, I guess you travel a little bit more easily. Myself, just having limited exposure to traveling outside the US, you know, it was just a very interesting conversation. So I'm honored to kind of represent the group there. So interesting dynamics and very interesting discussion, and just so thrilled about this. So this is great, Eric. And I'm glad you brought this up, because this is just brought, and I love the idea of the breakout sessions too. This is amazing to be able to talk more in depth with people. So thank you.
Thank you for that.
Mm-hmm.
All right. Anyone else?
Jennifer has her hand up, and then Carla. Did you have your hand up, Jennifer?
No, but I can speak if you'd like me to.
Yeah, why don't you go if you have anything to add, and then we can go to Carla next.
Sure. So I'll represent our room. So we were talking about differences between city, or like urban and rural, and how you find those differences. And what was really interesting is, so we were sharing about how in Korea, in urban areas or rural areas, you're finding that there's a lot of like group orientation relationships. And, you know, as soon as you got to know your neighbors, it was like, they're going to come over, they're going to bring you food. And if you let them into your house once, like, watch out, they're always going to be there, and they're just going to always be coming in. And so we were talking about, if you move from an urban location into a rural location, like, you have to be really careful about, okay, if you say, yeah, sure, come into my house, like, expect that they're always going to be welcomed into your home. And so trying to set up those boundaries and dealing with that difference in mentality of when you're living in a city or in a more urban area, you kind of want to keep your bubble, your space, because you have so little space where you're like, this is my own little private space. But when you live in a rural environment, it's like, no, there's so much more room. We want to invite you in. So we were chatting about those differences and how some of us are finding that as well, or how we're seeing the opposite where we're living in bigger cities. So we had people in the group in London who were saying, well, we kind of find the opposite, because in the city, we know all of our neighbors because we are all on top of each other, where in more rural areas in the UK, because you have so much more space, you keep your privacy, so you don't really talk to your neighbors. So it's just a really interesting contrast of the opposites depending on the countries that you were in.
Very
Carla?
cool.
Hi, everyone. I'm in St. Louis, Missouri, and we had Rebecca, who's lived in Asia and is in New York now. And she was talking a lot about urban-rural differences. She'd lived in villages and bigger cities, and the difference in cultures there. And then I think Alex, who had to leave early, said that his experiences working with international students at the University of Minnesota and helping the faculty adjust to working with the international students, teaching concepts of cultural differences. And then I was just saying, my first move was down the road from Chicago to Urbana to university, where I lived in a French house where we had intercultural experiences all the time. And then to St. Louis, which only 300 miles, is extremely different from Chicago. You know, it's an old city. It has roots, everything has to do with the river and the arch and definitely slower cultural, although it's changed over the many years that I've been here. It was quite a shock when I moved here. But we were just talking about how if you're planning an international move, there are a lot of questions you should ask people about their history of moving in the past. Have they ever moved with their families, moved for a job, moved for college, even visited relatives in different areas to gauge how much of a shock or what kind of adjustments the person may be faced with. That's about what we had.
Very good.
So Eric, I don't know if you want to wrap up. Was there anyone else that we missed, Tasha? Thank you for.
I don't think so. If
Okay.
someone, I did miss you. Now's the time to chime in. I
Yeah.
think I saw everyone who wanted to, but
Okay, super.
anyone
Thanks,
else.
Tasha. Eric, we have a couple minutes, so I'm going to just let you wrap us up and.
Okay. So yeah, I'm so sorry. You know, I just wanted to reiterate what everyone was saying. You know, we are all in agreement here, is what it sounds like, is that we do find these differences, you know, going from, you know, a rural to an urban area or vice versa, or we find differences, you know, going from an east to the west or the north to the south. Like there's a huge change from one place to another, and it's not always going to be defined by borders of a country. And so with that in mind, you know, we do find these differences, and you know, and once we realize these differences, we can celebrate them. But we also see the benefits, you know, that someone who may not think the same way we do, and once we start getting those building blocks set up, we do find ways to build bridges rather than build up walls. And you know, with those similarities, whether they're oceans apart or whether they're sitting in your backyard, you know, we do begin to discover that we do find this unity through our diversity. And that was all I had.
Okay, Eric, thank you so much again for joining us and for bringing up, I think, a very good topic that I think we could have spent a lot more time on. So maybe we'll revisit this one in the future, but thanks for getting us all thinking. It's something sounds like many of us have experienced personally and professionally. Just a reminder to those of you who are in the intercultural circle, we will be staying on, and Eric, our guest facilitator, will be sticking around too, so we can continue this discussion. For the rest of you, wishing you all a good day, a good evening, and thanks again. We'll see you in 2 weeks on for a very interesting topic on cultural adjustments with the topic of death and how different cultures handle that topic. And we'll have Doreen Cumberford joining us for that. So have a great day, everybody. Thanks for joining us.